You won't believe it, but this is the typical lunch of Japanese school children. Also, many educational institutions have their own swimming pools. In this video, you will learn the most interesting and horrifying facts about Japanese schools. And at the end of the video, I will tell you how serious the issue of bullying is in society. Enjoy watching. Teaching children to clean. Have you ever noticed that wherever the Japanese go, they always maintain cleanliness? Personally, I've always been amazed by this. Not only do they clean up after themselves, but the citizens of the land of the rising sun won't hesitate to pick up after others. And for them, it's not something remarkable or abnormal. From a very young age, all Japanese are taught to maintain cleanliness wherever they are. For example, you won't find trash cans on the streets of Japan. For many foreigners, this might be shocking, but for the locals, it's already a norm. Any garbage they have, they pack it in their backpacks. Food wrappers, bottles, coffee cups, literally everything. And most surprisingly, they carry all of this home and then dispose of it in the trash bin. In general, the Japanese are just obsessed with cleanliness. And as I mentioned earlier, they are taught this from a very young age. How exactly? Well, listen carefully. In Japanese schools, there are no janitors. All classrooms, halls, corridors, literally everything in the school is cleaned by students. It doesn't matter if the child is in elementary, middle, or high school. They all have to ensure cleanliness. Usually cleaning occurs on a schedule, where each student stays after classes to tidy up the classroom. But what exactly do the students do? Do they even throw away the trash? Don't worry, their duties are limited to sweeping and mopping the floors, as well as maintaining the cleanliness of the school board. Personally, it's hard for me to believe that all these teenagers and children willingly participate in cleaning. In our time, it's hard to get kids to put down their phones, let alone mop the floors at school. Clubs and swimming in every school. I remember my school years, playing volleyball in physical education class and running through the corridors playing tag. But Japanese students are a bit luckier in this regard. Besides having numerous free clubs and sections within the school, many of them even have their own swimming pools. And on top of that, almost every school includes swimming lessons in the curriculum. It seems unrealistic because in my childhood, they simply threw me into the water and said, "Swim, that's your lesson." In Japan, schools have specially trained teachers who can turn an ordinary student into a real athlete. In general, kids are really fortunate to have such schools, as there's always something to do. And what kind of clubs are there in Japanese schools? Literally any kind. If you, as a student, love playing tennis, no problem. There's a tennis club inside the school. You'll practice with peers who share the same interests. Love volleyball? No problem. There's a section for that too. But school clubs are not limited to sports. There are also clubs that study history, literature, or even mathematics. There are even clubs for ufology and manga reading. And the most interesting part is that any student can organize such a club if they find the first participants. In general, there's certainly no boredom in Japanese schools. Saturday classes and lack of vacation. But all these schools' activities come with a set of peculiarities and limitations. Firstly, in many schools there is still a 6-day school week. This means that students study on Saturdays, and they have only one day off, Sunday. Personally, I found it very unpleasant to study on weekends when all normal people are relaxing and enjoying themselves, and you are slogging through the grind of learning. In Japan, many schools still adhere to this policy. But the horrors of education don't end there. For example, summer vacation in Japan lasts only 4 to 5 weeks. It's unimaginable, especially when in many other countries students have a break for 3 months. Not only are the vacations only 4 weeks, but they are in fact non-existent. All students are required to complete homework assigned for the summer and participate in clubs where usually various activities take place during this time. It seems to me that they teach children about all these overloads, deaths from chronic lack of sleep, perpetual fatigue, and the pursuit of a career from a very young age. It's hard to imagine that ordinary teenagers have to study almost without weekends. If you calculate it, there are 52 weeks in a year, plus some small holidays. In general, barely 2 months of rest accumulate in a whole year. It's truly horrifying. I can't even fathom the scandals surrounding Japanese educational institutions. Teachers, society's elite. We've discussed how Japanese students hardly get any breaks, but what about the teachers? After all, they must also face an incredible workload, considering the limited number of days off in a year. Surprisingly, there's no issue with that in Japan. There's no shortage of teachers, and this is because society considers educators to be the true elite. Firstly, in all schools, students are required to show respect to their elders. If a teacher enters the classroom, each student must bow as a sign of gratitude. Secondly, the salaries of Japanese teachers are very high. Teachers are genuinely valued, so if you work in a school, you are assured financial stability. Lastly, respecting teachers is ingrained in the entire society. While in other countries there might be indifference toward teachers, and parents often think their child is always right, in Japan people deeply respect anyone associated with education. Personally, I feel that this mentality is something we lack. However, if you decide to become a teacher in Japanese school, specifically teaching foreign languages, be prepared. Among teenagers, there is a joke called kancho, which in Japanese means an enema. Strangely, it's foreign language teachers who students often run after in the hallways, forming a gun with their hands and pointing fingers directly at the teacher's buttocks. I think it's not the most pleasant thing that could happen in your life. But if you are not deterred by these jokes, I can confidently recommend pursuing a career as a teacher. School meals. By the way, I have a question for you. What was your school lunch like? Maybe you had your own cafeteria where delicious soup was served to everyone interested. Or did you bring your own food? Personally, my school meals were always paid, but special vouchers were distributed to the class, allowing us to get a free lunch. I often took advantage of this, but mostly I brought my own food. However, teachers always scolded me when I ate in the classroom. But what if I tell you that in Japan, this is completely normal? In Japanese schools, children often eat right in the classrooms. They literally arrange lunch in the middle of the class, setting up their dishes. Usually, a chef comes in and lays out a tasty lunch on the plates. But sometimes, the students themselves do it. Whatever ends up on the plate, the student must eat it, as throwing away food is strictly prohibited. It's hard for me to imagine how all the kids calmly eat school food, because nowadays students have become so picky that they don't even want to eat rolls. But an even more popular phenomenon is when people bring their own food. In Japan, such food containers are called bento, and it's a true work of art. In Japan, everyone is just obsessed with food, so they eat it not only with their mouths, but also with their eyes. All parents of school children try to arrange their children's school lunch as beautifully as possible. And students themselves know how to cook and often prepare their own food. Just look at how a simple lunch of a Japanese school child can look. It feels like a dish from a Michelin-starred restaurant, and this is an everyday affair for the school. Strict dress code. And if you've been to Japan, you've probably noticed that almost all students wear a special uniform. After all, schools have a very strict dress code. And don't believe in anime, where characters often have strange hair colors or clothes different from everyone else's. Each school has its own corresponding uniform, with distinctive features, and anything about it cannot be changed. For example, wearing multicolored jackets over the uniform is not allowed. All upper garments must be dark blue, black or gray. Students are also prohibited from wearing any accessories. Large earrings, brooches, cufflinks, all of these cannot be worn in educational institutions. And as for appearance, firstly, making changes to the school uniform is not allowed. Adding something personal, such as an accessory or a colored element, is strictly forbidden. Secondly, hair color must be naturally occurring. If you were born a blonde, you're out of luck. In school, there will always be objections to the color of your hair. Girls are also not allowed to wear colorful hair ties or have bangs below the eyebrows. For boys, only short haircuts are allowed. And, as you've understood, dyeing hair, wearing makeup, using colored contact lenses, all of these are prohibited. Moreover, girls are not even allowed to paint their nails. To me, this sounds absurd, but those are the rules. In general, you should not stand out in any way from the general mass. And if something goes wrong, you will have problems. Sukeban Apparition. Such rules and restrictions could not help but have a bad effect. Thus, in Japan in the early 60s, a special subculture among women was formed. It was called Sukeban. The essence was that young girls formed their own criminal gangs. In fact, they were very real informals who behaved extremely aggressively and defiantly. and the name Sukeban itself translates as woman boss. Apparently, all the members of these groups think they are the most important. What's special about Sukeban is that all these adorable girls wear extremely provocative clothes. This is the weirdest thing possible, especially in a school where everyone's clothes are identical. The girls themselves sewed on their clothes bright and flashy emblems, which indicated they are belonging to a particular group. But they didn't stop there. Bright makeup, piercings, miniskirts, brightly colored hair, and strangest of all, tattoos. Because in Japan, tattoos are very strict. So I'm very much surprised how ordinary girls could come up with such a thing. Besides the strange clothes, tattoos, and amazing images, the girls also behaved extremely inappropriately. Usually, the Sukeban would gather in crowded places, for example in schools or near railroad stations. There, they behaved in an extremely defiant manner, calling everyone around them names, shoving, and not infrequently even attacking them. Ordinary schoolgirls could even rob a store. But worst of all, many of the minors were seen selling drugs and prostitution. Unfortunately, the situation is not changing much for the better. A very large number of girls are still in Sukeban groups, and I think it's because of the strict rules in schools and society. Maybe all these girls are just fighting against the cruel rules and customs, and for some reason, I'm leaning more and more towards that opinion. Bullying. Unfortunately, the horrors of Japanese schools don't end there. You've definitely heard that there are bullying problems in Japan, and this problem is especially bad in schools. If a student stands out in any way in terms of appearance, has minor flaws, you can be sure that he or she will have a hard time in school. After all, school children pick on literally everything. Even freckles, overweight, or a large number of pimples can become a reason, literally, to expulsion. And it's very frightening. Here's one of the stories that happened in Japan to a high school student amid bullying at school. The 15-year-old boy loved his grandparents very much, but because he was constantly fighting with his classmate, he decided to kill them. One day he came home, stabbed his grandfather to death, and badly stabbed his grandmother. When the police asked him why he did it, he said he didn't want them to be ashamed of their grandson when he stabbed a classmate. Scary story, isn't it? Personally, I think society is most to blame here for literally destroying children's psyche. And here's the story of one of the girls. Not only can children simply be called names or shunned, school children often resort to violence as well. One 17-year-old girl recalls being bullied when she was 6 years old. In elementary school, boys literally bat her with broomsticks. Not only that, they molested her in the girls' restroom and bat her up in swimming class. The day she was attacked, she literally almost drowned. And unfortunately, all this bullying did not stop, but on the contrary, intensified. The girl even started to think about suicide, but fortunately she didn't follow through. And this case once again shows how big problems reign in schools in Japan. Personally, I would be very afraid for my children if they were to attend such an institution. But the scariest of all is the statistics of child suicides in Japan. Japan is one of the leaders in this terrible criterion, and school bullying is to blame. Most deaths occur on the first day of school. A total of over 18,000 children have died in Japan in 50 years. That's a very scary statistic. We can only hope that something will change soon. Conclusions. These were the most interesting and scary facts about Japanese schools. Thanks for watching.